Greetings from TV AIBD. Hi, I'm Philomena Pragasam with Connect with AIBD, and today I'm connecting with Nordin Abdullah, a face that looks like he's from a different land, but he has been in Asia for 25 years, working in many parts of Asia and now in Malaysia. Welcome to Connect with AIBD, Nordin. How are you today?
It's great to be here, Philo, and congratulations on putting together such an excellent show during a very difficult time.
Thank you, Nordin, and thank you for coming on board during a rather tense period, not only in Asia, but also globally. I think every one of us are going through something, a kind of crisis that doesn't seem to end. It's been more than a year since COVID-19. We heard about COVID-19 and it has not ended. And I'm talking to Nordin Abdullah. Well, he is an Australian and now living in Asia, Malaysia specifically. And he has been he is the founding chairman of the Malaysian Global Business Forum and also the chairman of the Communications Committee, former vice chairman of the International Chamber of Commerce, and he is also running the Crisis Management Center. By profession, he's a businessman as well as a crisis management specialist. So we're going to focus today on several areas about what's happening with the current situation and the crisis that's before us and how countries and organizations are managing this well. So we have an expert with us today, and we're also going to later look at how businesses can become more resilient once the world opens up. So Nordin, welcome once again, and I'm going to ask you a question, right? At this point in time, when we're talking, and with more than a year in COVID, crisis management has become quite an important word. You hear of governments talking about it, you hear of private sector people talking about it. So tell me, how has the crisis been well managed?
Well, I'd like to find, there's several examples how it's been well managed, but really what we look at is we live in the age of crisis, and that's really why we established the Crisis Management Center, to primarily help governments, corporations, and individuals deal with the various crises that pop up during their existence. And of course, COVID-19 has been the mother of all crises for us in terms of what we're dealing with in a daily basis for several years to come. We will first have to deal with the medical concern of this crisis, and that's still ongoing in multiple countries all around the world. But the real impact, I think, will be seen is in the economic sphere. Because of the impact on the economies, many economies have to shut down, go into lockdown, and some are continuing to do that. And you're going in and out of lockdowns, going in and out of levels of productivity, which has massive impacts on GDP numbers, massive impacts on job numbers, massive impacts on inward investment numbers. So in this crisis, there are companies who are doing very well, actually, and then there's those who have not done so well and looking to see how they're going to survive during this crisis. And that's the kind of role that we're looking to fill, is how to help solve some of these critical problems so that corporations can survive. And more importantly, those people who work for them get to keep their jobs, and those families get to continue enjoying a house and food and these kind of things that we've all become quite accustomed to enjoying.
Thank you, Nordin. The other thing you mentioned about keeping a job, right? One of the key factors when we talk about crisis, you have many organizations where people have to go to work because of an essential service. And the fear that they have, let's talk about this crisis, right? Many employees are facing a fear that if they go to work, they might get COVID. And this is the kind of crisis that organizations are facing as well. People don't want to go to work, even though they have a job, because they're frightened, because they see their colleagues dying. Now, how can management or organizations or private sector people handle this? They are having the output, but people are afraid. there's a great fear of dying among people now.
Exactly. And I think one of those industries is the media industry. And the problem or the wonderful thing about the media is they go there. You go and you find the story. Unfortunately, when you go out and find the story, you have to go and meet people and go through crowds, and there's a sense of rolling the dice in terms of hitting a daily risk, and we've seen many of our colleagues in the media lose their lives, and that has a ripple effect. And in terms of the psychology and everyone else in the organization, one, you're going through mourning, but at the same time, you're also worried about your own survival. And at the same time, you realize if you don't go to work, if you don't do your job, you're guaranteed of not surviving because you don't have an income. So you come very quickly to the point where, well, I have to go to work and I have to take all the precautions I can. And this is where we need to realize that a lot of organizations need to give a little bit more time and a little bit more resources to the moral support, to that emotional support for those people who are on the front line. And for me, I define anyone on the front line as anyone who's not in their house right now, or anyone who has to go out of their house to do anything. These are frontline people, not just the doctors and nurses, although they are at the cutting edge of the front line.
Well said, Nordin, because we don't know who has COVID. And if you just go out there, anyone could be walking with this particular disease, right? And it's such a contagious virus. And the thing is, what we're looking at today is that people have a big question. Do I survive? Do I continue to, manage my home and, go to work? Or should I be afraid and stay at home? And looking at the alarming deaths that are happening as well, or the alarming rate in which the virus is getting from one person to the other, there's a lot of fear of not just dying, losing jobs. How do organizations overcome this? Tell me, how would you, as a leader of a company, for instance, what should you do to ensure that you protect your people? Now, you mentioned about the media industry. We'll come to that later, because that is something where we're chasing the news. But what about looking back into organizations, let's say in a company like a factory or a bank, or what should they do, for instance, to manage this crisis?
Exactly. Well, firstly, you need to have rapid and aggressive innovation. Rapid means you're going to do it as quickly, as effectively possible. And that innovation now needs to say, okay, how do we start to change the way we've been doing things for the last, some banks have been in existence for 100 years. So how do you change the way that process takes place? 90% of what we've seen is, okay, we need to move online. We need to go to do more online meetings and these kind of things. But when it comes to factories and it comes to production, those people need to be in those facilities to actually produce things. So you've got to reduce the amount of risk, and building into the process, into your management process, into your manufacturing process, an ability to reduce risk will actually help you in the long run. Of course, the solution is to modernize your production, move to automation and these kind of things, which also helps people to, in the short run, lose their job. But then you need to, again, innovate as an employee, as an individual, to realize that COVID-19 has pressed the fast forward button for innovation, and it's just going to make things go faster. So you, as an individual, to remain resilient, need to press the fast forward button on your own innovation and on your own levels of productivity, and anticipate where the job market will be in 5 to 10 years time, or in a sense, 5 months time. We don't have the luxury of thinking a year in advance. Some people have to get a job by the end of this month or next month. So innovation and comes down to solving the problems for corporations as quickly and as effectively as possible.
that's a wonderful way of putting it, right? And being innovative. But what scares me is, with this pandemic looming large and seeing no exit tunnel. There's no exit at the end. It seems like that, and the easy way out. We see a real upsurge in innovation in technology. And I'm asking myself questions like, hey, come on, are we going to be replaced? Right? You just said that a while ago that people might be looking at robots, and with all the technology that's happening in the world today, humans can be displaced, right, by a lot of AI that's happening right now, and this is scary because they don't get any disease, they're safe. But so rather than looking at a very futuristic, innovative world, let's look at how we can save the world today, right? The people themselves. So it calls for better best practices and good governance from organizations, from governments, new SOPs in place, and these kind of things, Nordin, right?
Yes, I agree. And one of the things that we look at from the crisis management perspective is how do we design a solution which is community driven. As much as we want to get excited about the future and robots and sitting around enjoying drinks by the pool because the robots are doing everything, the reality is humans are still going to be involved. And now we need to start to think about, okay, we've got this crisis. The current color of the crisis is COVID-19, but it won't be the last crisis that we deal with in our lifetimes. So build a solution that is community driven. And then that community responsibility will actually make it in a way that you're able to find a solution that is best for the greatest amount of people in the shortest amount of time. And this is what we talk about when we start to look at solutions on a community or societal level. When it comes down to the corporate level, we need to start companies realizing that they need to move to best practices, and not just best practices within their own country. If you are now involved in anything in the global supply chain, the way things are moving is you need to be able to adopt global best practices. And this is what we want corporations to realize, because when you start to adopt global best practices, you will become resilient. And it's actually an investment into dealing with your next crisis. And that's one thing that we've seen here in Malaysia. Those companies who were getting it right in terms of their international standards, in terms of following the SOPs and following international benchmarks, are not impacted in the same way as those companies who didn't follow the global rules. So what we are seeing, and the other part that we're seeing, Philo, is corporations that are doing well are in critical supply chains. And critical supply chains are the future. And when you start to design a future for your new company or yourself, how do you shift your operations into those critical areas so that people will always need your goods and always need your services? And that's how we are seeing is that resilient approach to future planning of business.
That's a good way to look at it. I mean, looking at the future of businesses and what businesses will survive. New businesses have also loomed large during this pandemic, right? And they're becoming more relevant. And I guess will continue to be relevant in a long time to come. Now let's look at companies, right? For instance, where just going back to the basics of crisis and how it's managed, right? One of the ways, of course, is to set up good SOPs. But I think organizations also need to have now looking at how they should have some kind of consulting or what do you call this? A psychologist, perhaps an in-house person to be there, because this is also something that companies need to look at. Because if you look at COVID-19, it has created lots of orphans. It is, I've just lost someone in my family, and people are going through this fear. And it's a horrible fear, right? It's like we don't know if it's real. So I think companies should also look at providing good mental health, consultation or something for staff, because this is something new that should be in. What are your thoughts on this, Nordin?
Exactly, Philo. And one of the things that we we realize, and if you read any management book that's been written in the last 50 years, everyone says, people's the greatest asset to any company is its people. And what is it that defines a human being is their the emotional reality of that person. So when that emotional reality is under attack, be it from COVID-19 or any other crisis point, it needs to be managed by the corporation if you want to remain productive. And this is what we've seen. Those companies who are dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic in an effective way are able to manage, one, the processes properly, but two, their people are emotionally well-adjusted because they've been given the tools to deal with that. And I think that's one of the areas that, as we move into the second half of this crisis, hopefully, more and more it's going to be about emotional well-being. And there will be certain organizations and certain industries which will be impacted in a greater manner. So those industries where people can't avoid being out and about, like the media industry, for example, is a great example. Law enforcement and shopping malls and all this kind of retail sector. Actually, that level of stress, and we talk about the impact of long-term stress on human health and human well-being, it needs to be managed. And at least if corporations first identify the threat and then start to put in place the resources to deal with it, then they have a chance of dealing with it. If they ignore it and they put their head in the sand, you're guaranteed it will come to bite you. Not today, not tomorrow, but there will come a day when that gap that you left unattended will become the problem for your organization. And that's what we really try to do with crisis management is remove those threats and remove those gaps.
That's a good way of approaching this future of when businesses open up. And we're already talking about businesses opening up in Asia. And I think this is so crucial to really look at the well-being of the people, to allay fears, to provide a more important structure for emotional well-being of their workers, right? I think this is something that is crucial and not just important for those who are working in factories or in that they're facing customers every day, but also people in the media or even for doctors. I mean, even though they're doctors, people always think that doctors and nurses, they are the bravest of the lot. It's their job. You took the Hippocratic Oath. But I think they have families and they have fears. So that's why I think for now, all businesses, the nature of the businesses, no matter what it is, also need to look at the emotional well-being of their people. Nordin?
Exactly. And it's not just the emotional well-being of the staff member themselves. If that staff member is in a highly critical, highly forward-facing position, when they bring that home, the stress on their wife or on their husband, on their children is going to be immense. And that's why you see this COVID-19 have such an impact on society, because it may only be one person that is really at risk, but then because of the way that the virus spreads, because of the way the emotional virus spreads and the amount of fear that is associated with it, it will have a direct impact on the family. So your staff in that sense may be fine at work, but when he goes home, his wife is so worried that that's the problem. So again, if corporations don't look at this as a potential threat to their existence, not just the virus, then it will be very easy for one day, God forbid anything, an employee snaps. We look at, the U.S. Postal Service, many years ago, the whole time of people going postal was because of that stress that was created in the workplace, and then people just snapped. So we are looking at a potential mental health crisis following this, if we're not already in a massive mental health crisis right now.
I think for now, it's still a stage where many people are not even, when you have COVID-19, you're not even able to go to the funeral of your loved one, or you can't even say a proper goodbye. So things are not coming into a real picture yet. For many people, it's still a denial. Some people may never have seen the impact of COVID-19. What are we looking at? Where's this virus? I'm fine for the last 1 year. So there's a lot of mixed feelings in this area. And I think, Nordin, when businesses open up, even as I talk, people are opening up businesses which have been long shut. It's not just a matter of continuing what you've left behind 1 year ago, or 6 months ago, or 3 months ago. Today, we really need to look at best practices. We need to look at better SOPs. We need to look at the well-being of the human capital that we have right here, not just in Malaysia, but also everywhere. These are the important areas. And for even media, coming back to media, to understand that countries themselves need to really look at keeping the number one priority, the pandemic as the number one priority. If all countries can do that, then there's no necessity for journalists to run around chasing political news or some kind of social disturbance, because everywhere, I think the biggest crisis at this point in time is the pandemic itself.
Exactly. And I think for the foreseeable future, the primary story will be how the COVID-19 pandemic plays out. It will play out in the field of economics. It will play out in the field of politics. It will play out in the field of we're seeing sport impacted. We're seeing that entire way that we are accustomed to living in this previously globalized world. And I use previously globalized because it's really difficult to travel now. But the reality is, if we can't unwind from this, crisis, we will be stuck in this continuum. And that's really the challenge that governments face, corporations face, and individuals face. So when we start to address the crisis, we need to address it on the individual level, the corporate level, and the governmental level, so that it impacts the society in a positive way. So we need to start to ask ourselves the question, what is it that I can do as an individual that will help solve this problem? As opposed to asking the question, well, the government should do this, or someone else should do that. Ask yourself a question, what should I do to help solve this problem? And you'll start to get different answers, as opposed to shifting the responsibility or shifting in what I say is shifting the opportunity to impact the crisis in a positive way to somebody else. Take on the mantle of this challenge and go ahead and look for a solution in your own world.
I think that's a good way of looking at it, starting with yourself, right? Because if everyone knows the imminent danger of what this is and what best practices I should adopt, I think that goes a long way in prevention. And that's the way to actually look at how we can live in the new norm, right? When we go back to work, when things open up, So it goes back to us, the individuals, taking a stand on how to practice living in the new norm, right? New SOPs that should be in place, organizations coming up with good practices, good perhaps SOPs once they open up their business. I think there's a lot of learning to do, Nordin, in the coming months, even the year forward that we are looking at. There's so much to actually learn and be prepared to face the new norm.
I agree, Philo, and this is what you've said earlier. Individuals need to get it right. Organizations need to get it right. Governments need to get it right. So the entire society is getting it right. So that, again, we go back to that, all the individuals are safe. And that kind of positive thinking, that positive circle will lead us out of this crisis, so that we can get ready for the next one. Don't let your guard down. Don't think after we've dealt with COVID-19 that's the last. We've got to always remain vigilant.